นี่กล้องที่มาจากทางเมือง
does mean that the group can fund its interests in the hotel, certainly for the next 18 months with limited
sort of surplus and the draft statement. it's this sort of is realistic that we can preserve our current capability anyway. Yeah, I guess just to overlay the net profit slide, yeah, there's a lot more. Probably the deficits are bigger largely because of the effect of depreciation, but ultimately following a fairly similar trend to the cash flow that land sales over the next 18 months will get us cash flow positive, and we expect by then the business to be largely cash flow positive from its recurring trading to be sustainable. And yeah, that's probably, I guess, the main takeaway there. And it's not really built into the slides, but just as Mark talked about the effect on the balance sheet, look, we expect that there will be some impact to our balance sheet around property values and those sort of equity movements. So as a shareholder, that obviously will impact your accounts as well. But I guess out of this, as a shareholder in a non-financial sense, out of all of this, we're preserving our core capability.
Or 1, or possibly could they operate at level 2?
Well, in fact, Scott.
You're at with your property development has been a very fortunate thing. If this had occurred at the beginning of that, it would have been far more financially destructive. Yep. But does anyone else have any queries? Okay, that not being the case, look, thank you very much. A really comprehensive update, and great to see you recovered from the shock and being really positive and constructive going forward. So thanks very much to you both.
Bruce, thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Cheers. And I see we have Kelvin.
Great report.
Sorry, what was that? Okay, so we got Kelvin, and also is Peter available?
Yes, I am.
Great. So thanks, Kelvin and Peter, and we'll let you get onto the
working together in the best way possible for the collective benefit of them and their communities, which means less burden on ratepayers, happier communities and council staff, and more effective councils. So as we've set out in our statement of intent, the organisation really exists to do three things. First of all, to create effectiveness and efficiency gains for shareholders such as you. Secondly, to help increase the influence of the region. And thirdly, to help shareholders provide a better customer experience. What LAS does is provide an opportunity to think regionally without boundaries, and to then help councils use that thinking to act locally to improve the well-being of the community. So thinking regionally means that rather than individual councils trying to solve their problems individually, LAS can help them work them out with the costs of that spread, while still allowing local choices to whether to implement solutions locally. I think that it's fair to say my observation would be that over the years of its existence, the organisation's done a good job, but I think one of the reasons that I've been hired is that there was an opportunity seen to be able to really grasp the company's potential. joined up services
Well, sir.
across the region. And we both want to improve the well-being of the
Cheating's
community.
cheating, though.
Indeed, it's in your vision.
Okay, remember? That's what you guys have been
Secondly,
saying. Cheating's
as
cheating.
an organisation, as I've said before, we're not
Never
limited
life.
by boundaries. We're
Wow,
tasked
there are
with
still
thinking
Americans that
regionally
watch professional
to
sports.
enable
I
you
love
to act
professional
better
sports.
locally. And I think the opportunities to work with you and your companion councils to achieve your aspirations are boundless, regardless and possibly even more because of COVID-19. Thirdly, obviously, by necessity, we need resource to achieve our outcomes. And you'll see that some of the initiatives that we've proposed in the statement of intent will require some upfront investment in order to achieve some mid to long-term savings. Now, I said I would finish with a few words on coronavirus. It won't surprise you to know that as a board, we've discussed very early on whether we should make any substantive changes to our work program to reflect what will be a new reality. What we concluded indeed was that, in fact, we should keep doing what we're doing because it's going to be even more important. Moreover, it's going to help rebuild the region and increase that in a post-COVID-19 period, during the recovery period, there'll be need in the region for at least the following three things. First, security of public works to enable the private sector to plan long range, and I think importantly, commit to training and for the staff to commit to stay in the region. Secondly, a demonstration of restraint by public bodies on what might be perceived as non-essential spending, in other words, doing more with less. And thirdly, motivation and encouragement and development of current council staff. Now, we're planning to deliver all of those already through our work program as set out in the statement of intent. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. I obviously wish that I could have spoken with you in person, but no doubt that opportunity will arise sometime shortly in the future. Kelvin and I are more than happy to take any questions, Mr. Chair, but I wondered, Kelvin, if there is any additional points that you wanted to make.
No, well covered, Peter. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Yeah, as you mentioned, LAS has been active in our between our councils for a number of years now, and been very successful, particularly with RATA, the roading accord. But what's happening now is an absolute step change, and I totally agree with what you said about it being more important post-COVID rather than less. So yeah, I wish you every success, of course. Now, questions. I think Claire, yes.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And great to meet you via Zoom, Peter, and it's good to see you too, Kelvin. I did send through some questions, but two are ones that I'd just like to ask in this forum. The first one is that, you've made a strong case for continuing how you're going at the moment, that all those things that you're focusing on will be more important than ever when we're dealing in the post-COVID era, I guess. But a lot of the things that are done rely on the, I suppose, the goodwill of councils and releasing resources from their business to work on LAS stuff. And I can foresee that councils are actually going to be pretty hard pressed with their own staffing resources, dealing with extra things that have come out of the woodwork to do with COVID-19. And so, what assurance can you give us that you won't sort of find yourself high and dry, that you can't get the sort of resource that you do need, from the individual councils that have normally been really supportive because their staff are just completely committed to this other work?
Kelvin, would you mind if I answer that question first, and then
Sure.
maybe there's a few additional points you want to make? I think, Councillor, thank you. That's a great question. The good news is we had, I'm happy to say, thought of that as well. And one of the earliest things that we did well before lockdown was, when we could see this thing coming, was to reach out to councils to ask them to think about whether, in the context of any redeployment of assets and people that they were doing, whether there were going to be some people that might in fact be freed up to be able to work on some of our projects to make them go faster. And I was pleasantly surprised, particularly from some of the smaller councils, to be honest, about the positive response that we got in terms of offering up staff. That's the first point. The second point is that more specifically, Calvin's been in touch with the chief executives of all of the councils, I think as recently as yesterday, Calvin, where we've set out some specific skill sets that we're looking for in order to be able to advance some of our strategic projects. So, as I say, great question. Surprisingly, with positive response from the councils that we've reached out to. But you're absolutely right. The resourcing issue may ebb and flow over time, and it's something we're acutely conscious of. Calvin, did you have any points to add?
Look, I think that sort of covers it all off, Peter, to be honest. Good luck.
Well, that's really encouraging, actually. It's good to get, excuse me, it's good to get that clarification. That's great. Now, the question I had was about the energy and carbon management that's mentioned in the SOI here. I wasn't sure whether that is the carbon audit that our councillors sort of before the last election, that was one of the directions that we gave staff, that we wanted to get something organised in that which would help us, I suppose, formulate a plan, you know, for climate change and that. And is the energy management that's mentioned that RAS does, is that feeding into that audit or not?
So look, the short answer is, councillor, that no, it's certainly not the audit that you're referring to. I don't see any particular reason why the people that we engage to provide that support to councils could not help with that audit if that was something that the Waipa executive team were interested in doing. But I'm not actually privy to the status of the particular piece of work that you're referring to. I know that Martin Lynch, who's one of the guys that tends to work with Waipa District Council, has been doing some bespoke work in this area, but I'm not sure whether it specifically relates to that report that you're referring to.
Okay. Oh well. Thanks for the clarification.
Okay. Any more questions? No. Okay. Well, hey, thank you very much for that presentation, and yeah, particularly now in a period of significant change, it's really great to see the positivity we have going forward, even in with the weird world we have around us at the moment. So yeah, thanks Peter, Kelvin, very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Doc.
And I see Andrew Michael is available and will talk to us about the LGFA.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'll just maybe make a few brief comments and then touch on the current environment and then leave some time for questions. So LGFA started in 2012. It currently has 67 member councils with a number of others in the process of joining. And the current environment is probably just, even for the councils that don't have any debt, they realise that having access to finance is important, so it's sort of probably speeding up, their timetable for joining. LGFA is based on similar models in the Scandinavian countries. The longest of those is in Denmark. That's been going for 130 years now. So what LGFA wants is to be a very long-term provider of financing to the local authority sector. The objectives are interest savings on council's debt, to provide a range of borrowing options, so short-term and longer-term financing. And probably the most important one is access to debt markets. And that's been the area that's perhaps been the most challenging thing over the past couple of months. In terms of the financials, the profit for the year to June 2020, which was forecast to be 10 million, is on track. So we even ran the part numbers for April yesterday, and again the monthly profit is on track. A lot of the forecasting that's in the draft SOI is just out of date. It's just been superseded by the events that we've seen the last few months. But that said, just remember that LGFA has $10 billion of lending to the sector. So we borrow from investors and on lend it, and every time we do, we take a small margin. So the profit really on all that lending is locked in until those loans mature. So even though there may well be some variability in profit, a lot of it is locked in. That said, the profitability probably shouldn't be your primary concern. It is where councils get the savings is in the savings on their interest costs and certainty around accessing of finance. So that's probably the key thing. The current environment, interest rates are low, so maybe that's one little bit of good news for councils. So short-term interest rates, councils like yourself can borrow below 1% now. Longer term, we just completed a $1 billion debt issue just over a week ago. So we borrowed for 6 years and we borrowed at 1.46% for $1 billion. So we will add on 20 points to councils, or 25 points to Waipa, I think it is. So you'd be accessing longer term money, 6-year money at around 1.7%, just to give you some idea of borrowing costs. So that's, you know, one bit of good news. Probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, we were receiving record borrowing requests from councils. There was a lot of councils knowing that maybe, you know, fee income is dropping and they needed to get more money in to cover that. So we've never had we've had a higher amount of borrowing costs. LGFA was the first non-government entity, entity other than the government, to issue in New Zealand since the level 4 lockdown was imposed. For a while, investors were very reluctant to invest. It's just, you know, they're worried even if we buy it, we won't be able to sell things, and there's just that whole risk aversion. But we had 2 developments. One was LGFA have a $1 billion standby facility from the New Zealand government that expires next year. But the Minister of Finance provided a letter to LGFA saying that the government would roll that over for a further period of time. So that support from the government was just, it's really symbolic to investors that there's going to be that ongoing support from the government for LGFA. The second thing that occurred is the Reserve Bank announced that they were going to buy back government bonds. Subsequent to that, they added LGFA to the list of securities that they're able to buy. So they signalled they'd buy back up to $3 billion of LGFA bonds from investors. And it was that really gave the confidence to investors that if we buy them, there's actually going to be another huge buyer in the market for that. So again, you know, the level of support that we're getting from the government has been extremely important. There's going to be significant challenges for councils, particularly in the 2021 sort of financial year. I'm part of the working group that DIA are running, looking at doing a lot of modelling on council financial performance for the remainder of this year and next year, and that's feeding into a lot of the other government sort of work streams, such as the recovery sort of work stream. So there's some quite sobering reading come out of that. For Waipa, you're probably well positioned in terms of your debt levels, not high relative to some of the other higher growth councils in New Zealand. So yeah, there are a lot of challenges, and that's probably one of the challenges for us, is that potentially we're going to get breaches of the financial covenants in the next financial year, not this financial year. So to date, we've never had a breach of any of the financial covenants, but if revenue falls significantly for councils with a large amount of debt to start with, then they could well breach that net debt to revenue covenant. So that's something we'll have to deal with. But for those growth councils, one of the last tools they've really got is having to cut their capex, and again, that's not particularly conducive to starting growth in the economy and is working against a little bit about what the government wants to achieve. So I'd just like to, we appreciate that there's no compulsion for councils to use LGFA. You're still free to borrow from any other sources that you want. So I'd just like to acknowledge Ken and his team, because Waipa was one of the early supporters of LGFA. We very much value your support of us and the professional relationship that we have.
Thanks, Andrew. I think, almost goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, LGFA isn't seen genuinely, and certainly, well, I guess Waipa hasn't used your services that greatly. We certainly intend to in the future, possibly even more with COVID, possibly not. We don't know yet, do we, Ken?
Yeah, that's true. We don't know, but but very comforted by that 1.7% number, Andrew. It's that is very well priced borrowing ability.
I like the one that was below 1% even better, but yeah, short term possibly isn't us that much. No, thanks, Andrew. Does anyone else have any questions? Bruce, and then Claire. You're still muted, Bruce.
คุณนึกภาพว่าถ้าเกิดสมมติเอาไอ้ตัวนี้ถ้าอันนั้นเกิดหนักขึ้นมาแล้วเหนื่อยเลยนะหนักเกินไปไม่น่าได้อันนี้ก็แข็งอยู่นะแล้วเราใช้แต่ว่าศูนย์ถ่วงมันจะไม่ได้ดิถ้าแต่ศูนย์ถ่วงเราปรับได้นะเดี๋ยวเราใช้ขาถ้าเราใช้ขาแต่ปัญหาคือพอเราใช้ขาดูก็จะอยู่แบบนี้เราใช้ขาตัดใหญ่ไหมล่ะแต่หน้าที่เพิ่มเกียวยังมีอยู่เยอะแต่น้อยหนักนั่นเองที่เพิ่มเกียวอยู่ไม่บอกให้มองได้หมด เคลองเปลี่ยนเซตติ้งเป็นก้อนนี้ก้อนนี้ก้อนนั้น